G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with a movie about water management. I've been having to upgrade it. This is the inside out water bed which catches and stores the runoff from the roof of the machinery shed. It not only feeds this solar warmed, not quite right to call it heated hose with a line that feeds the kitchen sink, which then drains into a bucket which I habitually throw out in an arc at the forest uphill from the hut. So I've really only slightly redirected the water from the roof of the machinery shed. Just shifted it a bit. Likewise, water off the forest side of the hut, being essentially bath water for a tree, isn't something that I particularly want to drink. So it feeds what I call the cascade tank. When this tank is full, it has sufficient head of pressure to feed the boy wall via a poly pipe that goes under the driveway, shielded in a steel pipe, and using the gravity from the slight hill that I'm living on, to take its overflow. Drinking water lives in a honey drum. When the drinking water drum is full, it cascades off to the boy wall feed, and the drinking water comes from the side of the roof that has almost no trees over it. Last week we got 31 millimetres of rain, which at fixed wing water bomber prices represents $1.86 million onto my 100 acres, or the 100 acres I pay rates on. At helicopter prices, it's $4.96 million worth of rain showed up here last week. By this system I captured 1.24 tonnes, right, which is exactly one Iroquois helicopter load added to the probably 2.5 tonnes that was already here. So I've got about 4 tonnes of water in this old boy wall. And those of you familiar with my scroll will be aware that I spent 10-12 days failing to patch this, and then I finally figured out a method that works. But then the 10-year-old inflatable Chinese swimming pool found a whole new way to fail. Over here we have the retractable nozzle, and 2 days after I finally figured out a way to patch the hole the kangaroo bit, this thing popped out and fell off, so I've had to re-glue it. And if I put 30 lungfuls of air into this thing at sundown, it's still holding this much the next morning, and then the sun heats it up and it slowly vents its overpressure through a leak somewhere, I'm not certain where. And then as it cools down in the late afternoon, voila, I have to stick another 30 lungfuls in there, so it's probably losing 3 litres an hour overall on average. not only do I use this water to share with the wildlife, when I've got enough of it, I treat myself to a bath. Though most of the time I make do with a shower, and between using the shower I store a little bit of ready-use dry firewood in there. And I also wash my clothes using a British bar mix pressure wash, which dates to the 1970s, and it's had to be repaired several times since, but it still works, and that takes about 140 litres to wash a bucket of dirty clothes. It's also where I get the water to put in the firefighting backpacks. It's where I got the water for the soda acid fire extinguisher refill. And because the big Simplex has obviously got a very, very slight leak, so it loses just a little tiny bit of water every day. Eventually, when I figure it's lost about 10 litres out of the 130 litres that's in there, I'll vent the air out of it, top up the bucket of water that it's slowly squirted out, and then I'll use solar powered electricity in a storage battery to pump it up full of air again. The problem is, this is aluminium, this is brass or bronze. It's got a steel axle and there's grease in there, and the grease has deteriorated since last time anybody had the courage to try and take that off and risk the idea of snapping the bronze or the aluminium, because it's all going to be corroded very heavily. So it's one of those things that ain't quite broke, so it ain't worth pulling it to pieces and risking busting it just to get it to work perfectly. At the moment it's functional. At worst, instead of having 135 litres and 100 psi, I'll have 125 litres and 90 psi. It's still better than standing there with a wet branch. So, the only 4,000 litres of water I've got is in a bag that is failing several different ways, and it's 10 years old. I have got a spare 12-foot diameter pool in a box, and the only spot that is plumbed to receive the water is here. So therefore, what I need to do is level a pad downhill from and adjacent to the ancient 12-foot diameter pond, and then stick another bag on the pad. And it has to be level, because if it's not, these things take off rolling downhill. And this one's actually 3 degrees lower on the downhill side than it is on the uphill side, and it's never quite filled evenly. There's always been half the ring submerged when the other half was just touching the bottom of the ring. So I'm going to try and do a better job on this one. So I spent nearly all yesterday digging a Casuarina sub rosa tree out of the ground, and over here there was a Melaleuca alternifolia. I don't feel too bad about that because both of them have grown during my time paying rates. Fairly ancient tools, a mattock, a rake and a 22-pound fettler's crowbar. To get underneath on the root ball of the tree, I think this originally started life as part of a dray axle but my grandfather used it as a blacksmithing tool. Got to say, I've shifted a lot of grass, dug out a fair heap of Melaleuca and Casuarina roots, and I've got these sitting upside down so you can see what a pain in the backside they were to dig out. That's 2 Melaleucas, and this is the Casuarina. And the reason I'm making this movie and talking about it is because that delays the moment when I have to pick up the mattock and keep going and finish levelling. And of course, like a good boy, after I chainsawed the Casuarina, at least I could use it for firewood, so I cut it up and stacked it. And that's what my little project is up to at the moment, with the theory of trying to save that water by shifting it downhill. And in town there's a 10-foot diameter pool. I'm making the pad 12 foot by 12 foot just in case I can find my way clear to buying another 12-foot pool, but I think I'm going to have to go with a 10-foot pool and go searching for 10-foot ultraviolet covers, but I know where I can get them. So I might have to spend another $200 on this project, but it's the only water I've got, and I have to shift it so I can save it and put a new bag where that one is. Personally, I'd kind of rather be on the whippersnipper, extending the boundary of slashed ground around the camp, because well, down in southern Australia they're looking at 5 days where they're going to have maximum temperatures over 40 degrees, and sure as shit, you know, that'll come up north in probably 4 or 5 days time. We'll start getting really hot weather. Meanwhile, in North Queensland there's a cyclone just about to come down the coast and hammer all the tourist traps where the people voted for Campbell Newman for State Führer and Tony Howard for King, I guess. Anyway, that's a bit off topic. Welcome to my grunting and sweating and swinging a pick, trying to level one part of a rock block. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.